studied the book of Proverbs and found 18 key themes that lead to wisdom, understanding, and success that are rooted in fairness, justice, and righteousness. Today, we are going to be unpacking the first principle around what it looks like to begin to succeed. How do we gain wisdom and understanding? What are the foundations that allow us to press into wisdom and actually take on the rest of the 17 principles of wisdom, understanding, and success? All throughout Scripture, from the New Testament into the Gospels, all the way through the Old Testament, we see stories and teachings and principles, one-liners of what it looks like to be wise. But how do we get there? How do we begin to become wise? How do we be people of wisdom? Because most people will tell you that wisdom comes through experience. And yes, that is true. There is the one way that we can become wise, and it's through our day-to-day experiences, through our lived experience. The thing that tells us directly we're doing something wrong or we're doing something right by the direct output of our actions, our decisions, and our words. And these things tell us, based off of those outputs and those outcomes, whether or not we've done right. And so yes, experience is a key factor in our ability to be wise and hold understanding. But there's another key factor that's important for us. It's a posture. It's a way in which we need to approach the world in order for us to actually begin to gain wisdom beyond our years, beyond our experience, so that when we step into every experience, even before we have experienced it, we can do it wisely, and that we can have an exponentially successful life, even from young. Throughout the book of Proverbs, we see the foolish and the wise juxtaposed against each other, walking two parallel walks that are the complete opposite of each other. Think about two mirror universes, or Stranger Things, for example. The foolish are walking a life of destruction and chaos and pain, while the wise are walking a path of success and joy and hope and influence. Throughout the book, we see that the wise are guided by wisdom and the other is guided by self-centeredness. We see that we can walk these two paths in our lives and decide which one we're going to step onto. I'd like to take us to Matthew 18, verses 3 to 4, and specifically focusing on verse 4, where it says, "Whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom." We often speak about childlikeness in church communities. We find ourselves saying that we need to become childlike, and it comes from the scripture over here. And I've always found it really difficult to understand what exactly they mean by it. But when I was actually looking in Proverbs, I found that there were the four things that characterized what it may have meant to be childlike. And really, I think that these four things are key for us to posture ourselves to be able to take on wisdom and understanding beyond our years, so that we can actually begin to live it out in every part of our lives and begin to walk the journey of success, parallel to the fools of this world, parallel to the people who are living lives that are not really leading anywhere. We can take on these principles along with the 17 other principles that we can learn and find ourselves actually beginning to understand what it looks like to hold wisdom and understanding, because we have the right posture, the right mindset, the right way of looking at the world that allows us to take on what the rest of Proverbs is telling us. And so the four things that we need to begin to learn, the four things that begin to allow us to be open to wisdom and understanding that leads to success, is this. We need to be humble. We need to be teachable. We need to be receptive. And we need to be dependent. I think when Jesus was speaking about being childlike, and all throughout the book of Proverbs, it continues to mention these principles. These four things are the posture in which we receive humility, because it allows us to see ourselves as someone who has something to learn. Humility can be characterized by us doing things and continually thinking of others. The moment that we become self-centered, the moment that we turn our eyes on ourselves, we're opening up our lives for chaos and destruction, because we become the center of our own worlds, and therefore our world gets smaller, our perception gets smaller, and we can no longer see what others have to bring to the world. But if we are constantly doing and thinking of others in our behavior and in our motives, then we know that this is going to change their lives, because we're focusing on them. And our lives become so much bigger when we can be humble enough to realize that the world isn't centered around us. Our influence isn't centered around us. Us gaining influence isn't about us. However, humility, the ability to do things for others and think of others more than we're thinking and doing things for ourselves, is central to us becoming humble people and being able to take on the posture of wisdom and understanding. The second thing is teachability. How curious are we? I think that's a real question that we need to ask. How many people are we willing to learn things from? The more people that we're willing to learn things from, the more we're actually going to learn. If we feel like somebody isn't somebody that we can learn from, then we're making a mistake. We're missing out on something. Every single person that we come across in our lives has something to give and something to teach. And we need to hold that mindset when we're speaking to people. Be curious, ask more questions than give statements. We need to find ways to just suck up knowledge, especially when you're young. I promise you, when you're young, you know absolutely nothing. You don't know anything enough to be able to have a conversation with somebody about the things that you believe are right, because your perception and your perspective is misinformed because you just don't have enough information. As young people, we just don't have enough. And the older I'm getting now, I'm beginning to realize just how little I knew when I was a bit younger, and just how arrogant I was, because as I grow and as I learn now, I realize that if I hold a posture where I'm asking so many questions, I get so much more effective when it is time for me to speak, because now I have clarity. I have a depth of understanding of the situation that is allowing me to make decisions that are actually genuinely impactful. And so I'm mostly in the beginning of conversations, or in my consulting, or when I'm speaking to people who are asking for advice, I just ask question on question on question, because I know that that is what is going to change my mindset and change my perspective and change how I will approach the situation that is in front of me. And I'm not just going to jump in thinking that I know the answer. I think in my mind, the first thing that I do often is I go straight to the answer. And now that I've kind of learned that I need to be teachable, I need to question everything, I need to be curious, then my answer is actually so much better. Everything that I give is so much more impactful because it's informed. The next thing that we have to learn is to be receptive. Receptivity is teachability that is translated into changed behavior. Not only do we have to be willing to learn from others, we have to be willing to change because of what we have learned. A receptiveness means that we are actually taking it upon ourselves. And now this is dangerous. I understand that people aren't always thinking in our best interest. They're not always giving the best advice. However, we as a blanket statement should be receptive from the start, and then later we can filter down. First, we have to take in the full scope of their perspective so that we can understand its context, so that we can understand why it is that they did the things that they did. And then we can learn the core principles that come from it and apply it into our own lives and our own situations. But if we're not willing to first hear them, be curious. And so that receptivity level right in the beginning needs to be high. And then we need to filter it into the behaviors that we want to take into our own lives to try and change the trajectory of our decision making and our our own behaviors so that we can move towards success and influence and wealth and general wisdom and understanding. But first, it starts with us being teachable and translating it into behavior changed. And the fourth thing that's incredibly important for us to understand is dependence. This is a difficult one because culture speaks to us about our independence. There's a push and a drive, especially towards men, to be independent, and women as well. Actually, if I'm being honest, like we're getting told all the time that we need to be dependent, we need to be our own man, we need to be our own woman. However, a marker of wisdom and understanding is that we can't and never have been able to do life alone, nor should we. We shouldn't be doing life alone. We shouldn't be living this way. Why? Because when we do things on our own, firstly, we haven't got enough context and perspectives to find the best outcome. And secondly, we have only got so much time in a day to get something done. We have to move towards a joint and united vision of something in order to accomplish something bigger than ourselves. To be independent, in its definition, is to be arrogant. It means that we are not thinking of others and doing things for others and with others. It by definition means that we have chosen the route of the foolish. We have chosen the route of the person who doesn't want to live for anybody but themselves and are completely and entirely self-centered. Competent and independent are not the same thing. Competence can lead to independence and can be a marker of competence. Independence can be a marker of competence. However, when competence is united in a community that is moving towards a united vision, that is when impact and influence are at its highest. This is why we have companies with multiple employees. The biggest companies have thousands of people working on a united vision because one person could never pull that off. This is a principle that we have to understand. And the moment that we decide that we're going to be this lone wolf, that we're going to do things on our own, that we want to do things our own way, this is us immediately deciding to give in to arrogance. We've chosen the route of somebody who is described as a fool in Proverbs. And dependence is not only a marker of wisdom, it's also a marker of maturity. Because when we're listening to other people, especially people that are wiser than us, and when I say wiser, they're older, they're more experienced, and they've listened to wise counsel themselves. And now they're passing on that knowledge down to the next generation. If we're neglecting that wisdom, we're not learning. We're not dependent on people around us. We need mentors, we need communities, we need people who are helping us as much as possible. And so we need to be all four of these things. We need to be humble, we need to be teachable, we need to be receptive, and we need to be dependent, because these things are going to change us. And then we can look towards like so many different characters in the Bible that are not wise and weren't wise. In the Gospels, we can see that the Pharisees, Jesus constantly spoke of as unwise and far from God. In Proverbs, it speaks and says that the fear of God is the root of understanding. It is the beginning of wisdom. And so I think when we see the Pharisees, there was something that Jesus saw in them that we are not seeing. And there's these three things that I think that Jesus saw in the Pharisees that really shift our understanding of the path of the fool. We've just unpacked the path of the wise. They're humble, teachable, receptive, and dependent. But the foolish are rigid in their thinking. They hold a self-referential righteousness, meaning that they refer to themselves and their behaviors as the highest form of a way to live. And if you're honest, that's the smallest way to live. If you think that you have the best frame for how you should live, you are just wrong, arrogant, and you've chosen independence and self-centeredness. Rigid in your thinking, meaning you can't think past your own hand, meaning it is this way, my way, or the highway, and you never go past it. Seriously, rigidity is the wall between you and wisdom. And self-referential righteousness is keeping your world small and your perspective small. And then the last thing that we see in the Pharisees is condescension, because they've got this self-referential righteousness, meaning they refer to themselves as the highest order for the way things should be. By nature, they are condescending to everybody else that they speak to, because they should be living up to me. They should be living up to how I do things. The way I do things is the most important way to do things. If you don't do it this way, you're not doing it the right way. And so we condescend. And as a result, we actually burden others. We don't lift them up. We don't actually take burdens off of people and empower them and enlighten them and do what Jesus did when he said we be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. What this does to us is it burdens others, because we are so small-minded that we can't see into their perspective. And so as a result, they can't enter into our world, we can't enter into their world. And so even in our close relationships, when we behave this way, we create walls, we create tensions, we create stress, we create burden. We make it difficult to live with us. And as a result of us placing these expectations that we ourselves often can't meet of others, then what happens? People start to leave our lives, and we actually begin to move towards that independence, which is actually just another word for loneliness, that the fool walks alone. And we see it in other characters in the Bible as well. We see it in Saul, the first king of Israel. We see that he was, for a while, a great king, and then all of a sudden he chose his own way. He was rigid in his thinking. He couldn't see what God wanted. He was self-referential, meaning he was the highest standard for how things should be. And as a result, nothing could ever lift beyond his own perspective, because he was the ultimate standard. And you know that we're all fallen. We're broken people. We're not perfect, and we don't do things perfectly. And so as a result, the entirety of Israel suffered because of it. And he was condescending. I mean, he tried to kill David who knows how many times. And then there's other characters as well. We see in Judges before the kings. We see Samson, for example, and many of the other judges as well. But Samson is a great example because he was rigid in his thinking. He wouldn't listen. He felt like he was the man with the hair. He felt like he was strong. He felt like he could do whatever he wanted. And as a result, he fell. He was blinded. He was humbled. However, if we look to someone like Jesus, if we look to someone like Paul, we see that they themselves humbled themselves. They learned. They were receptive. They were dependent on God. They were learning from others around them. And they lived life in a way that made themselves bigger. Jesus was having discussions from the age of 12 with people in the church and in his communities. He was doing these things because he knew that he needed to be humble, and he needed to represent humility and teachability and receptiveness and dependence, because we need a dependence on God and we need a dependence on each other. We need to know each other. We need each other. We need to be open to listening to each other and changing because of what we've heard. And we need to hold a posture where we're not doing things for ourselves. We're not self-centered. We're doing things for others, and we're doing things thinking of others. The beauty of this is that when we begin to tap into humility, teachability, receptiveness, and dependence, and we begin to unplug and untap that wisdom inside of us and an understanding of things, then we actually begin to act with justice, fairness, and righteousness. And so this is what wisdom actually leads to. It leads to a behavior change in us and a character shift in our way of doing things that ultimately leads to everything that we do leading to justice, fairness, and righteousness. And this is what it looks like to be wise. And this is the first principle of being able to learn and understand wisdom, to hold understanding of things and unlock everything else that's scripture as a whole, but also Proverbs and its 17 other principles carry.